Okay, it's time to dive in and learn the basics of core data. That is, how you can integrate core data into your project. Now, when you're creating new app projects, you have the option to integrate core data at the project's creation. But there's going to be a lot of times when you need to add core data to your project after the project has been created. Thankfully, this is actually pretty easy to do. When you create a project with core data enabled, all that Xcode is doing is including a few objects and then writing some boilerplate code for you. In the following videos, you'll do this yourself, and thankfully, you'll see it's not too hard.
If you run the project, you'll notice that clicking the Add button automatically adds a new friend. But do notice that currently only the friend's name will be displayed. The other information, such as their picture, address, age, and eye color, will be added as we proceed through this course and learn the ins and outs of core data. Click the Add button a few times and add some data. Close the application and start it up again. All your data is gone. This is where you need persistence, and in the next few steps, you'll learn how to add persistence to your app using core data. If you were starting with a new project rather than using an existing project as you're doing in this video, you would simply check a setting at the time of the project creation to indicate that you'll be using core data. This will add a core data model to your project so that you are ready to begin using core data immediately. In Xcode, select File, New Project from the menu. Select the iOS Single View App template, and then indicate the use of core data checkbox in the next dialog. And this will create a new project for you with core data already baked in. In our case, we need to add a core data model to our existing project, and that's actually a straightforward process too. Right-click on the Resources folder, select New File, and then select iOS Core Data Data Model from the template chooser. Name the data model as PetPal to match your project. And that's all it took to bring your project almost up to the same state as you'd be if you opted in to include the core data functionality for a new project. There's some boilerplate code that is added to the app delegate if you had core data enabled when you create the project, but we'll be adding that code in a bit. But all you've got at this point is an empty data model. You need to add entities and attributes for those entities to represent your objects. Now, what are entities? An entity is a core data terminology for an object class, or if you prefer database terms, a table. And the attributes under an entity are basically properties, or in a database, columns. Since you want to keep track of your friends and their pets, the entities you'll need are going to be a friend and a pet. Let's start with the friend entity. Select the PetPal data model and click the Add Entity button at the bottom of the window. Switch to the Data Model Inspector in the right pane and change the name to Friend. Still in the Data Model Inspector, under Class, set Module to Current Product Module and CodeGen to Manual None. Click the plus button under the Attributes list and set Attribute to Name and Type to String. Set the new attribute and switch to the Data Model Inspector for the attribute, and uncheck Optional. This creates a new core data entity named Friend, which has a name attribute of type string. You don't want this attribute to be optional, since you always want your friend data to have at least a name. Now, when you actually generate a class from this data, there's going to be an issue when it comes to optionals, and we'll cover that in a later video. So what we've created here is just the data model. You can think of it as a blueprint for the data to be stored in core data. But in order to refer to this entity in code, you need to generate the relevant classes for the entity. With the core data model selected, select Editor, Create NS Managed Object Subclass from the Xcode menu. Click through the next two dialogues without any changes and select the data folder as the destination for the generated files. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these newly generated files will still appear under the root folder in the project navigator. Notice how that you have two files generated for the friend entity, friend plus core data class.swift and friend plus core data properties.swift. This is actually another handy feature provided for working with core data. Since the core data files can be generated by Xcode at any point, After you make changes to your data model, how can your class have any additional code for helper methods or calculated variables? If the files are always overwritten when Xcode regenerates the class, then all your custom code will be overwritten, right? Well, not quite. The friend plus core data class.swift file is regenerated only if it doesn't exist. So that's where you put all of your custom code. The structure for the class and the underlying properties as per the core data model appears in the other file, friend plus core data properties.swift. This file will get overwritten anytime you regenerate your NS managed object subclasses. Note how this file has a property for name, the attribute which you added to the friend entity. For now, select these two files and drag them to the data folder. Now, you may be wondering, what is this NS managed object class? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that just happens to be the subject of the next video.
How was that first step? Don't worry, that's the hardest step. Well, actually, the second step is kind of hard too. Well, so isn't the third and the fourth, and well, forget all about that. Just let us know in the comments how you are doing. Are you following along, or are you getting tangled up in the weeds? The good news is that it gets better, so stay with us. The fun is just starting.